Hello, my name is Dr. Tom Bennett. I'm with the Battleship New Jersey Oral History Program. Today is July 20th, the year 2013, and we're aboard the battleship in Camden, which is berthed in Camden, New Jersey. Today I'm working with Mr. Donald Surowich, who's involved with the program, and we're interviewing Mr. James Dunn of Chalfont, Pennsylvania, who served as a Staff Sergeant E5 rank from 1968 to 1972 in the U.S. Air Force. He served in Vietnam with the 14th Special Operations Squadron as an electrical specialist, servicing airplanes such as the C-47 Gunship, sometimes known as the Spooky, and the AC-119, sometimes known as the Shadow and Stinger, to troops on the ground. He was stationed at Nha Trang and later at Phan Rang. Is that correct?
Phan Rang.
Phan Rang, thank you. Jim, thank you for talking with us today. Let's start off the conversation. How'd you get involved with the Air Force?
Well, Vietnam was going hot and heavy, and I was just getting out of high school. I started a tech school for electronics and electrical repair work. But I was anxious to get involved. I had a lot of high school buddies that were already in the service. Of course, I was eligible for the draft, and I decided that if I were going to be in this war, I'd want to go in the service of choice, which would either be the Navy, which my dad served in World War II, or the Air Force. So, and it's a funny thing how I wound up with the Air Force is I had gone on a deep sea fishing trip with a couple buddies and got sick as a dog. I decided I don't think the Navy's the one I want to do, and I wound up at an Air Force recruiter station who this guy had told me that yes, he was in the Navy and switched back over to the Air Force because it was a better service. So anyway, that's what convinced me to sign up.
Now, at the time, by 68, there was a sizable amount of anti-war protest because Vietnam would be a contentious war. Did that impact your thinking at all?
Well, I don't know. Did that impact my... I came from, like I say, my dad was in World War II, and I just had that mindset that it's your patriotic duty to serve your country. It's what I wanted to do. Actually, a couple of my friends used to joke, well, you better sign up and get in the war before it's over. You know, you don't want to miss it. But it was a very romantic notion at the time, thinking that, you know, I had to do this. It was almost like a John Wayne movie thing. You want to get involved in a war. I really didn't know what I was getting into, to tell you the truth.
And that's probably very typical, based on people I interviewed, of that time period. They had a sense of patriotism, weren't quite sure what they're getting into, but it's something that everybody should do if you're a patriotic young man. Off they went. Now, you were living in Pennsylvania at the time?
Yes, I was born in Philadelphia and raised in the suburbs in Delaware County.
So once you enlist in the Air Force, where's your boot camp, and describe what boot camp is like? And this is for people, again, 50, 100, 200 years from now, so they understand Air Force boot camp at that time.
Okay, I would just like to back up 1 second and talk. You said protest, did it have any impact? Not on me, but it did my dad. He really didn't want me to be involved in the war. A lot of my friends went to college. They got deferments for things, and that's what he wanted me to do. So he was a little bit ticked off when I came home and said I had just enlisted. He said, why did you do that? And his take on it was, it's a political war. It can end any day, and you can just be a casualty coming back in a body bag, and then they just start, it's over, which is essentially what happened later on. But
and by the way, what did your dad do during World War II? He was in
the Navy,
an
enlisted man in the Navy. He was a petty officer, and he served on board a destroyer escort. I believe it was the Stenton. I believe was the name of the ship.
And for the historical record, destroyer escorts are short little ships.
They are
destroyers, and they bounce a lot. And he served in the Atlantic,
yes,
which was very tough on destroyer escorts because of the choppy water.
As he explained to me, a destroyer escort is the smallest ship in the Navy that's still classified as a ship. So yeah, they are small.
They had a 3-inch gun on the foredeck or so like that. They were anti-submarine patrol type ships.
A couple of what he called twin 40s, the 40-millimeter anti-aircraft guns. But yeah, they weren't heavily armed.
So now let's get on to Air Force boot camp. What's
okay, Air Force boot camp, basic training takes place in Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas. There's a big sign when you get there, Gateway to the Air Force. And that's where I served my basic training. And and that was approximately 6 to 7 weeks, and the wrong time of the year to go. I went there mid-July in through August. Not a good time to be in San Antonio, I can tell you. Between the physical training that they put me through and the heat, I lost a good 30 pounds while I was there. It really trimmed me down. But I was there and left, I guess it was around September was when it was September when I got.
Just when it started to cool down a tiny.
That's when I got sent to Illinois, called Chanute Air Force Base, which is strictly for training, and you could go there for any number of specialties, learn how to do electrical work or engine repair or whatever. And I spent a few months there. I'm trying to remember. I guess it was almost 6 months that I was there, learning how to be an aircraft electrical specialist. So, and it was cold.
Cold, and the training to be an electrical specialist is fairly intense.
It is.
I mean, there's a lot of electrical knowledge you have to learn and so on like that. It's not an easy 4 or 6 week training cycle to go through.
It's not, like you say, I had to be there. It was 6 months all told. I did have a leg up, though, on my rest of the class because, like I say, when I got out of high school, I went to a technical school called Radio Electronics Television School, RETS. But I did learn a lot about electronics at that school, basic electrical work, but more electronics. So when I got in the Air Force and I got into my tech school, I knew a lot of things before they actually gave it to me in the books. And especially if it had to do with solid-state circuitry, things like that they really didn't get into a whole lot. And they would give us tests periodically. You go through phases of the course, learning different aspects from the basic up to the more sophisticated. And I guess you could say, on the average, like every month or so, you would get a test to see, had you really learned something, and are you qualified to move on to the next level? Each one of those tests, I wound up scoring 100 in. And my classmates would say, oh, you aced that one. Another one, you aced that one. And they were all a little jealous because I was the only guy who knew all the answers and really didn't have a whole lot of trouble with the class. So bottom line was my nickname for that whole time became Ace. And it stuck with me for the whole time I was in the Air Force.
Everybody needs a nickname.
Yeah.
Did many people drop out of boot camp or the electronics school, do you recall? Was there?
Not that I'm aware. And again, you didn't drop out. You may have washed out and they would reassign you. But the Air Force was real particular. It was about giving you aptitude tests and seeing what you were really qualified for. So if you didn't come up with a good score on your aptitude test for something like I was involved in, you'd wind up being a cop or a cop, as we said, the military police, or at the time they called them air police. Then they changed it because they got the nickname of being APs. So they APs, and they changed that to security police. But anyway, that was not my thing, and I don't know too many guys that actually washed out. If you didn't do well, they could always get you back and repeat the last portion of your training. So they would usually give you that opportunity.
Don, any questions?
Yeah, a couple questions. What was your draft status, and how did that influence you in your decision in joining the Air Force?
Well, I guess it'd be 1A. I was definitely eligible. I don't remember my number, but I was the right age. I was 18, 19 years old, and there was many other people being drafted in my neighborhood. Like I say, I decided I didn't want that to happen. I'd join the service of my choice, and that's how I wound up getting in the Air Force.
So you joined at the same time that they instituted the lottery system in the draft?
Just about that time, yeah. Yes. It may have been slightly before, but...
I think it was before.
Yeah,
Lottery
I think it was.
Came a little bit after that.
Yes.
With the lottery system, if you had a number that was way out of the potential of being called, you were safe.
Mm-hmm.
And if you had a number, then you would just...
If you had a low number, then yeah. But I was really what they called draft bait at the time because of my age. And
the people who were drafted, normally they're drafted into the Army.
Yes.
Were they nervous about that you recall? Because the Army meant that if you're going to go in for your 3-year draft period, that means infantry.
Right.
Rifle carrier. Do you recall any nervousness over that from your friends?
Well, oh yeah, in fact, at the same time I enlisted in the Air Force, and then I came home I got some leave to come home from after basic training was completed, and I ran into a friend's mom who was drafted into the Army and went through his whole basic training. When he got orders for Vietnam, turned out he deserted and wound up going to Canada to wait out the war. But yeah, there was a lot of people that I knew that were definitely nervous about being drafted into the Army, and would go to a lot of streams, whether they call politics through their parents, that they knew somebody, the deferment for education, or maybe even hype up some physical problem that they had so that they would be deferred because of a physical disability. I knew guys who would do things like eat 5-pound bag of sugar to raise their blood pressure, all kinds of crazy stuff like that.
A friend of mine was planning to go to Coast Guard officer school, last minute decided not to. He went to his family doctor's office, and the doctor knew his family and gave him a deferment, quote unquote, for his back, which was not a bad back. But he got deferment that way. That was not until the time period, because again the war is unpopular by '68.
Do you have any, or have you developed any opinions about those that avoided the draft?
Oh yeah, I definitely did. I thought it was my patriotic duty to do that. If they avoided, now if they had a legitimate reason, that's one thing, but there are a whole lot of people that just, they spent their night and day trying to figure out how to get out of it. So, I didn't think much of those people. I thought, if called to serve, you should, but there was a lot of opinion, especially over whether the war was actually necessary or justified, which I changed my mind on later on, but at that point, I thought we were doing what we should do.
By the way, what about the morale of all the young men that going through boot camp, and now, in this case, electronics school, air electronics school? Was there any discussion about the war? Were they nervous over possibly being sent to Vietnam, or was it just too far away at that point for them to worry about?
Well, no, there was always discussion about it, because you knew, that was down the road. Although in the Force, you had a good chance of being sent to some other theater like Germany or Hawaii or something like that.
My brother's in Goose Bay, Labrador.
Yeah, exactly. Labrador. We had a split group. There was regular that were in the regular Air Force who had enlisted, and then there were other guys who belonged to the Air National Guard or reserve units. We all went through the same basic training and tech school together, but they knew at the end of their training they were going to go back home to their Guard unit or reserve unit, and there was no way that they were going to get shipped over to Vietnam.
And that was for a lot of young, intelligent men who had the ability to do the sophisticated training offered by the Air Force to not go to Vietnam by going into the National Guard.
Right.
I remember that was very important. Air
Yes.
National Guard was a place to go at the time.
Yes. And yeah, we called them bangs. We put an F in front of the Air National Guard. And I won't get explicit about what the F stands for, but I guess you could get.
By the way, a former president of ours, George W. Bush, was in the Air National Guard, a pilot. Did that impact your opinion of him in any way? That
No.
During the Vietnam War, he served in the Texas Air National Guard,
Right.
but didn't fly in combat.
True. Of course, I heard long after he was served and when he was in about his exploits and the fact that he wouldn't show up for training on weekends and things like that. He was missing in action. A lot of the training he should have gone through. I just figured, again, his dad was in politics, and that's how a lot of these strings got pulled, as far as who wound up where. I just figured he was one of the lucky guys. I didn't really have a bad opinion about him versus President Clinton, who I know for a fact was dodging the draft and was involved with protest. And so, yeah, even though President Bush didn't get involved in combat, I still had more respect for him for the fact that he was in uniform and he did learn to fly and whatever, versus Clinton, who avoided the whole deal, was never in a uniform.
Sure. Now, after you're finished with your electronics school, where do you go next? Are you sent to Vietnam at that point?
No, actually, I was sent back down to Texas. It was funny because when I left basic training at Lackland, I remember taking off and heading toward Illinois to my next assignment, which was for training. And I looked out the window of the airplane and I said, "Goodbye, Texas. I never want to see you again." It was obviously an uncomfortable situation, not only going through basic training, but the temperature it was just hot and dusty, and I didn't need Texas. So after I got finished with my my tech school at Chanute, my assignment came in. They put you wherever they needed you, and I got orders to go to Kelly Air Force Base, San Antonio, Texas, which is actually separated by a fence from Lackland Air Force Base. So I went back to where I didn't want to go in Texas, and I did nothing but bitch and moan about it the whole time I was there, which wasn't very long. Of about 7 months, maybe 8 months, I guess. I didn't realize what good duty I had. That was the best assignment I ever had, was at San Antonio, Kelly Air Force Base. It was relatively easy work, although I worked on really old reciprocating aircraft, the C-124s, which at the time were the biggest airplane that the Air Force had. Again, they were recips, and they had transports with the C-141s. They could not carry the same things that a C-124 carried. I don't know if you've ever seen one, picture of one, but a 124 had very stubby wings, a very fat fuselage, and if you looked at the side of the fuselage, it actually had 3 levels of what looked like portholes, because inside that plane, once you got in there, it had 3 separate levels, including the top deck where the pilot and the co-pilot and engineer were.
Was there any civilian counterpart for that aircraft, or was it never used by the civilian fleets?
No, it was never used by the civilians, but it was the only way that you could get other than putting it aboard a ship. It was the only way you could get something like a tank or a Huey over to Vietnam in a relatively short amount of time.
Gunship, not always a gunship, air rescue and so on like that. A UH-1 helicopter used in Vietnam and so on.
Correct. Yes.
So how long were you in Texas, and then where did you go after that?
Well, I was there for like I say, about 6 or 7 months, I believe, until then I got my orders for Vietnam.
Did you volunteer? Or
I did not. I didn't have any choice about it. In fact, I was at a low grade of learning how to be an aircraft electrical specialist. The Air Force has grade levels, and I was a 3 level, which is still in training, on-the-job training sort of thing. You'd have to move up to be a 5 level to be independent and go out and work on aircraft without supervision. So I hadn't even gotten to that point yet. And I thought, since I was still in on-the-job training, so to speak, they would never send me to Vietnam, but that wasn't the case. They needed me there, and I got assigned. Orders came in for Nha Trang, and I guess it was about 2 months later that I wound up there. I did have to go down to Florida at the Eglin Air Force Base. I had to stop and remember. I was down there for maybe a month before I went to Vietnam for a combination of training for the aircraft I was supposed to work on and survival training. So, which was perfect as far as I'm concerned, because like Texas, Florida was hot and it was on the Gulf Coast there, but it was also extremely humid. So they used to send everybody there in the Air Force for survival training, including the pilots.
Sure,
yeah.
The hot, humid climate of. And for the historical record, Nha Trang, spelled N-H-A, new word T-R-A-N-G, is about central coastal Vietnam. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes.
Now Nha Trang has become a very beautiful tourist city along the ocean. By the way, before we even get to your duties there, did you ever go swimming in the water?
I did.
Beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah, Nha Trang, of course, it was sort of like a Wild West situation. You go to the beach, at your own risk, because you're in the wide open there. If someone wants to take a shot at you, they could. So I didn't go there that often, but I did go there just to say that I was in the South China Sea. Swam out about a half mile to I guess it was like not a buoy, and then swam back. But I was laying on the beach for the most part. I didn't really care for it all. Well, the water seemed to be, like a grungy brown. Had a lot of debris floating in it, and the sand was very coarse on the beach. It wasn't a nice powdery sand.
Well, I was up outside of Da Nang. I got back to Da Nang once and went to China Beach. Beautiful, clear white sand, crystal clear blue water, but sharks. You got to be very careful. So if you swam out a half mile to a buoy, a lot of sharks out that way. I don't know if you realize that, but Vietnam had a lot of sharks off the.
I did not realize about the sharks. All I knew is that while you were out there, especially hanging around that buoy, there's nobody's going to come and help you out. We did have one particular situation when I was on the beach. One of the planes that was stationed at Nha Trang was an F-100 fighter, and this pilot had trouble coming in. He wound up landing on the beach right there. He was the runway, hit the beach, was kind of shaken up, and he got out of his craft. He survived the crash, but and started walking and back towards the base. He had really lost any recollection of flying. Right, he was in bad shape, so we wound up getting him the aid that he needed. But that was another thing, on that beach. You had to watch out for low-flying aircraft.
By the way, you get to Nha Trang. What are your, if you can recall, what are your first impressions of Vietnam now? You're probably landing in Nha Trang, correct?
No, actually, I landed at Cam Ranh Bay.
Cam Ranh Bay.
The commercial aircraft that I went over there on landed at Cam Ranh Bay, and from there I got dispersed on C-130 to Nha Trang.
Was that Flying Tiger that flew you with commercial aircraft? They did a lot of
No, I think it
contract
was a contract. I think it was like Continental or Eastern or one of those that they contracted. Yeah.
And now you trained again. You got acclimated to Vietnam conditions in Florida. So when you got off the aircraft, was it similar or different? As soon as you come out that hatch, I just remember my situation. I was in California, dry and hot and very humid. Just boom, hit you in the face.
There were two things. I remember circling the base before we landed and looking down there and seeing a lot of flashes, which I thought may have been lightning, but it wasn't. It was actually gunfire around the base at Cam Ranh. But we landed at night, so you couldn't see a whole lot. But I remember when they opened the hatch and I walked out, what hit me more than the heat and humidity was the smell. I don't think I'll ever get over that. As far as I was concerned, that country had this smell to it that I couldn't ever forget until I wound up coming back home. And
try to characterize for the viewer of this interview someday. How do you relate? Can you relate that smell to anything that we today can understand?
Well, I guess the closest you could come to it is maybe stagnant water. That's sort of a smell to it, and mixed in with other things. I guess there were maybe faint cooking smells. I used to talk about the South Vietnamese sitting there, the mama sons eating their fish heads and rice, and they would put all kinds of little things in there. I'm trying to remember the name of the nut that they put in there. It was like a red nut that they used for flavoring.
I know what you're talking about.
Yes.
They pop back into my mind.
Yes.
Lychee nuts?
Lychee nuts?
Yes, I think it was.
And their teeth would be stained
Exactly.
as a result
Yeah.
of that, sure. They'd be smoking a little cigarettes like that.
Yes.
And
And
their teeth totally...
just walking by somebody eating that, the smell was repugnant to me. It was like, oh wow, how long is that fish?
Since you remember the smell of fish, when the NVA came in close to our fish at night on the very hot nights, you would smell them. You could smell the fish sauce if they're like 20 feet away or something, that just sort of wafting towards you. And that's sort of typical of Vietnam, that smell of fish sauce with the fish sauce and the fish heads. It stays with you for a long time.
It does, yeah.
Now, what was Nha Trang like as a base? Because you said when you landed, you saw flashes outside.
Well, that was Cam Ranh. Coming into Nha Trang, it was. I think I landed there during the middle of the day. The next day after landing there, when you get into Cam Ranh Bay, the first thing they do is acclimate you to being in country. They take away all your cash, and trade you, for the script that they were using over there. So you weren't allowed to have any American money, and they indoctrinated you on things to do and not to do, as far as like if you were to venture downtown, that type of thing. So
how long did that indoctrination last?
Oh, only 12 hours or so, yeah. And then, again, I was on a C-130 and headed towards Nha Trang, slightly north of Cam Ranh Bay.
And now the C-130 is very different than contract aircraft
Yeah.
that you flew in.
Yeah.
It is a combat aircraft and almost anywhere because it
True.
can reverse the props on its propeller and stop at about 100, 150 yards.
Yeah.
This is for the listener in the future.
Yes.
Do you recall getting on that C-130 and saying, uh-oh, now I'm getting into Vietnam? Seriously?
Well, I got over there, though. Again, I still had that John Wayne, romantic ideals about the war itself. And hadn't been shot at or anything yet, so I really didn't know any better. The C-130 was another adventure. It was almost like I was in a movie. Okay, now I'm going to see and now I'm going to go see the action. Yeah, you've got the red jump seats that are on either side. And that's what you sat in, and you put your duffel bag in front of you. And, no air conditioning or anything on a C-130. Noisy as hell. They have C-130 a couple of what they call inverters, which convert DC power to AC power, and they just scream. They're mounted on the side of the fuselage, and they're right there. So unless you had headphones or something on, you heard that. Plus the roar of the engines, which were turboprops, jet engines with a propeller on them. So they were noisy. It was noisy. Excuse me.
No airline stewardesses carry you and bring you drinks.
Yeah.
Like this.
No, nothing like
So
that.
when you land at the Trang, what do you see? What do you recall upon initially arriving at the Trang?
Well, it was different than Cameron in the sense that you could actually see a little bit. It wasn't that far to the downtown area, and I found out that you could get off base and go downtown, provided you had a pass, which I wanted to do just to say that I'd been downtown. Although again, we received indoctrination about what to look out for. Don't drink the water. Watch out for the street urchins because they're all over the place. And I'm sure as you wore the jungle fatigues, which had the big flappy pockets that you could store things all over. Well, one of the things you didn't want to do is put your wallet in your back pocket because the South Vietnamese kids would come up, and while one was shaking your hand and distracting you, another one could be in back of you with a razor blade, slitting your pocket and letting your wallet or valuables
That
drop
happened
out.
to one of my corporals out in the middle of nowhere. A little Vietnamese kid jumped out of the bushes all of a sudden, came up to him. We didn't know what to do. His little tiny hand slipped right in his side pocket like that. Out came the wallet. The last corporal went to run after him into the bamboo bars, and I grabbed him and said, "Don't do that. That's a trick, because the kid will run, turn right,
Yeah,
you'll go straight,
need all
you'll
his
be
buddies.
trapped," something like that. Yeah, it was catch him, but he lost his wallet. And his wife's pictures was in there. He was all upset. He said, let's get out
Yeah,
of here.
it's again they would usually use a gang tactic and come up in groups, maybe 4 or 5 or more, and again there'd be a group in front of you as you're walking and pulling on your hands and everything, keeping you distracted while somebody was picking your pocket in the back. Of course, that's another way of losing things like your wristwatch while they were pulling on your hand. They were pretty good at pocketing. And,
Was there any danger of going into what was downtown the Trang like, and was there any danger going there? Any VC agents or any people that might not like you because you're an American?
yeah, there was plenty, and that's the thing that you had to learn, that you couldn't tell the good guys from the bad, especially in a downtown situation. So we were forewarned about that. Looking for things like satchel charges that they would leave. Bicycles were the main source of transportation, and they'd have baskets on the front of them, so it was not uncommon for somebody to be riding a bicycle with a satchel charge, leave it parked up against some area that was heavily trafficked by American GIs, and just wait for it to go off.
Did that happen while you were there?
It did not happen in the Trang, but later on when I got the Phan Rang, it did.
And Phan Rang is where, by the way? For the
Well, Phan Rang,
historical
again, is just a little bit further north than the Trang, not very far, all on the coast. Everything I'm talking about, it was always on the coast. Cam Bay, Nha Trang, Phan Rang, all along the coast. So, yeah, it's other than that, they forewarned you about the prostitutes and what to expect with them. Again, don't drink water. Don't make the mistake of ordering a mixed drink because they put ice in it and it's made of the same water, and all the different things that.
Did you go out of the base armed, or were you not allowed to carry weapons out?
I was not allowed to carry weapons. So that's another story about the time frame that I got there when I arrived in Vietnam. It's a side story, but just prior to me arriving, Da Nang, which is way north in Vietnam, a huge Air Force base, it's a city. There were several different squadrons of Air Force people stationed there, plus Marine Corps, Army, and like you say, it was a city. There was a situation to where they had an invasion at night to where their perimeter was overrun. And everybody there, including the Air Force, carried a weapon. So the Air Force guys like me, who mostly are involved with support of aircraft on the ground, don't get out there, pounding the bush like the rest of the grunts. They weren't really sure what to do in close quarter combat, and they started shooting at anything that moved. And unfortunately, they shot a couple of Marines. So the general who's in charge of the Pacific Air Force, who was in Hawaii, found out about this, and he put out an order that all Air Force personnel, unless you're flying, when you're flying, you can carry an M16 and a .38 revolver. But other than that, you would keep your weapons locked up. If you needed them, they were in one of those steel storage containers. They'd open that up. So it was a whole process that you had to do if, in fact, your perimeter was overrun.
Did you feel? I know when I left Vietnam, I had to turn my weapons in when I left my position with the Marines, and bunch of us young lieutenants, back in the Hang, ready to fly out, had to wait a few days. We felt literally naked without our guns. How did you feel not having a weapon in an area where an attack could occur, and it could happen very quickly, but everything's locked up and you may not get it? Did you ever recall any feeling like you're...
Oh yeah, I was uneasy about that. I watched the whole procedure because we would go through drills every once in a while. Get over to where your weapon is. All the stocks on each M16 had a number on it. You had to find your weapon. It was no ammunition with it. That had to be issued separately. So it was a real Chinese fire drill as far as I was concerned, and totally inadequate as far as defending yourself. So I didn't care for that at all. And again, most of the time I didn't need the weapon. I was on base. There were people guarding my perimeter, so it wasn't an issue.
Did you have air guards guarding your perimeter, and leave it to the Army Marines to do it?
No, it was mostly the Army that would be on our perimeter. That was another thing that they really didn't want guys like me out there on the perimeter unless they really needed me. Only because of all that training that I had gone through. We just talked about, 6-7 months of training or whatever to be the specialist that you were. They didn't want you out there, defending the perimeter if you didn't need to.
Plus, they wouldn't want you to be captured either, because the enemy would bleed you for information.
True.
Bleed you for information.
Yeah.
Because did you have a secret security clearance, or was it confidential? Because of what you worked on.
When I was over there, it was secret. Yeah, not top secret, it's just secret.
Now, Don, do you have any questions on this one? What was the attitude of the other Air Force personnel when you're in Vietnam towards the war? Did they just do their job? Were they patriotic? Did they not want to be there? Something in between, a mixture? What was it like?
It was a mixture because, as you know, when you got there, it was started a calendar 365 days until you get to go back home. And that's what I found the difference was. When you first got there like I did, you really didn't know much better. But the guys who had been there for 8-10 months, they definitely had a different attitude about things, which was basically negative. And that came from a number of different things. The fact that you never seemed to get anywhere with this war. If the Army was out there and we were supporting them with our gunships, you'd take a certain hill or area, and then you'd leave it. And I was, again, the mind frame of World War II. You didn't have borders that you had to respect in World War II. The object was to just crash through those borders and get to the enemy and do away with them any way you could. In Vietnam, you had to operate inside a box. You could only actually fight while you were in South Vietnam. We were bordered by Laos and Cambodia, and we knew that the North Vietnamese were in there. The Viet Cong used to go there for sanctuary, but we couldn't follow them there. So, again, when I first got there, I didn't understand any of that. But after I was there for a while, I would talk to the air crews to come back from different missions, and most of the time I was there, I was at Phan Rang, not in the Trang. Shortly after I was at the Trang, I guess a month and a half to 2 months in, they actually turned that over to the South Vietnamese Air Force, and they moved us out there. We left some of our gunships there, some of our aircraft for them, a lot of helicopters, and we moved the majority of the planes up to Phan Rang.
Before we get up to Phan Rang, what was your opinion of the South Vietnamese Air Force as far as either working directly with some of the personnel or just having knowledge of it?
Very nonchalant, seemed undisciplined as far as I was concerned. They really didn't seem to have their heart in. Some of them did, but a lot of them didn't. And I dealt with their maintenance people as well, trying to train them. Prior to leaving the Trang, you would have to teach them how to work on it. And they were more interested, the ones I saw, in what they could get you to buy at base exchange or what they could possibly steal and sell later on than they were on how to train, fix an aircraft. So I wasn't impressed. I do remember talking to one of the guys that was in our air traffic control tower, and he said, these guys are making us crazy. They flew what they called A-37s, which was made by Cessna. It's a jet, and it sits real low to the ground. I don't know if you've ever seen them or not, but they turn them over because it's relatively easy aircraft.
Was it a training jet used in the
It was a
United
training jet in the United States, and they were called T-37s for training, but they were A-37s when they were over there because they were actually fitted with guns and drop ordnance. They had hard points on the wings to drop ordnance. So, but that's what we gave to the South Vietnamese to train them, and they would get up and fly. You know, they really didn't have any discipline when their squadrons went up to go on a mission. And this one guy I talked to in the air traffic controller, he said, yeah, they came back from a mission, and I got a call over the radio. We finished, we come in now, and they just, without clearance, just landed. He says, I had to scramble to keep, you know, the rest of the planes that were in the pattern, our planes, you know, 130s and 119s, from coming in. They had to wait until all these guys got down before they could actually get.
Side interest, I worked with help train the South Vietnamese Army Rangers in our area up in An Hoa, and their sense of technology was different than ours. They didn't understand rusting, oxidation of metals out in the field. That you don't clean your rifle today, it will be rusty tomorrow. Talking on a radio, field radios, turn the volume down just so the other person at the other end can pick it up. Otherwise, signal's going to be picked up. They would turn it all the way up and scream into it. If the person's a mile away, they would scream less than if the person's 10 miles away, even though the radio can reach them in any case. It was a different sense of technology with those people. And some of the people I worked with were very dedicated. Others could barely get them on a helicopter to go out on an operation. They'd be running away from the helicopter.
True.
So it's somewhat similar to what you're talking about. I believe that it's really a mixed bag. The sense of nationalism wasn't there.
No.
And if you had good junior officers, it would operate. Senior officers quite often would get their jobs by paying somebody off in the Vietnamese government. And the average private knew that, and they were not always dedicated.
Right, and they, a lot of them switched over, you know, just to get the food and the uniforms and, you know, some clothing and be on a base to where they were taken care of. But when things got hot, I knew for a fact that they would throw down their weapons and run, you know, and take off their uniforms, and now they're no longer part of the
yeah, we had a joke. The best supply system for the Viet Cong was the South Vietnamese Army.
Correct. Yes.
Talk to us now about the Americans, the pilots you debriefed and crewmen. What was their attitudes? What did you gather from them when they came back? You would talk to them after a mission.
Well, they were pretty upbeat for the most part. I mean, they did what they were supposed to do. Again, being part of a gunship squadron, our main objective was to provide close air support for the troops on the ground, which we all are very happy to do. You know, that was our mission. If we knew we could be out there supporting somebody on the ground that was getting, you know, shot up, and we could come in with one of those gunships and just clean house, that was great. I ran into a lot of guys in the Army who, when they found out what I did, what I was associated with, shook my hand, thanked me very much, said, you guys saved my life. In quite a few different situations I ran into guys who said that. And it just made me feel very proud that what I was doing was important.
For a minute or two, talk about the several types of gunships that operated in the unit. I think you mentioned the Spooky C-47s, the AC-119. Talk about the C-47 Spooky first. How is it configured? What is an AC-47? How is it configured with guns? And then go down to the AC-119 if you can.
Okay. The Spooky, or the AC-47, had several different. We had several C-47s. Some were AC, some were not. They used some for gunships. They used others for I guess psychological warfare. They had giant speakers mounted on them, and chutes where they could shove leaflets out saying, you know, come over to us and we'll feed you, and, you know, stop supporting the North Vietnamese, Viet Cong. And
if I can just jump in, one of your Air Force planes, they would drop these leaflets called Chu Hoi slips. Chu Hoi means to come over to our side with a little pass. The enemy soldiers were not supposed to carry it. They would all get in trouble. Our position got Chu Hoi one day. About 1 million of these leaflets fell on An Hoa. Somebody had the wrong ordnance
Correct,
in the
yeah.
Air Force that day. So we all start jumping around and saying, "Chew hoy, we're giving up." But go ahead.
It's very possible for that to happen. Luckily, it was leaflets and not any kind of ordnance they were dropping on you. But yeah, they you would see them loading boxes of those leaflets on board these C-47s. They had other C-47s were used for a myriad of different operations. But getting back to my job, the AC-119 or 47s, they had 4 of what we called miniguns on board, and some flares that they could kick out to light up the area. You know, again, they flew 90% of the time at night. It was a rare occasion they fly during the day, unless they had a base being overrun and they just needed them. The main reason for that was they had really no way of defending themselves as far as anti-aircraft fire, unless they could, you know, shoot up that gun emplacement or whatever. But they flew at night just for their own self-preservation for the most part.
What is a minigun again? Because somebody may listen to us 200 years from now. How do you describe a minigun?
Minigun is an electrical version of a Gatling gun. And I say that because they're actually driven by batteries, and they've got a belt-driven feed system to feed their ammunition into them. 6 barrels on this gun, and it whirls, like I say, I'm not sure the exact revolutions per minute, but I know that one will put out approximately 3,000 to 4,000 rounds a minute, which is...
What area, we talked about this before the interview, what size area would that gun cover in, say, so many seconds or a minute?
Well, again, aboard the Spooky, who had 4 of those guns, they could cover almost a football field. Now, when you jump up to the next version, an AC-119, they not only had the 4 miniguns, they also had 2 20-millimeter cannons that were also a Gatling gun type of thing, electrically driven, and could punch out another 3,000 rounds a minute each. They also were shooting a round that had depleted uranium in them. That was meant for shooting up tanks. They could put out enough to put a bullet every 9 square inches in a football field within a minute's burst. So yeah, both of them. It was impressive, the amount of firepower.
Did any of these aircraft, because again, they didn't fly that high. They were,
no.
what, 1,000 feet up?
3,000.
3,000 feet
was their
up?
maximum altitude for
Which
the most
could be
part.
reached by a heavy anti-aircraft machine gun, like a 12.7 millimeter, similar to our 50 caliber. Did any of them ever get hit or get damaged or sadly crash or something like that?
We had quite a few. We lost quite a few airplanes and aircrew. Again, there wasn't much chance to bail out if you got hit at that altitude. Anywhere from 3,000 feet would be your normal maximum altitude, but they would get lower in a lot of situations. And then, before you can fire the guns on either aircraft, the aircraft has to go into a 30-degree bank. The guns are actually tilted such that they can't fire straight out. The airplane has to go. So you're in an orbit while you're on that mission, flying in a circle, so that you can actually operate the guns. So you are a target, you know.
An easy, slow-moving target.
Very slow-moving target, yeah.
So how many aircraft did you have, and how many of them got hit or were destroyed ultimately?
Well, I don't know the total of aircraft destroyed. We did have a lot of battle damage. They would come back. There was a few while I was at Nha Trang that we lost, one of which crashed fairly close by, and as a field maintenance squadron, which I was involved in, the 14th Field Maintenance, meant just that. You went in the field to fix your aircraft if need be. And so I remember going out trying to recover instrumentation and what have you on a C-47 that had crashed in a rice paddy, which was an adventure for me because I wasn't.
Was that far outside of your position?
It was a couple miles outside the base.
Nha
Trang, yeah.
Nha Trang. Well, a couple miles outside of the position is a dangerous area. I mean,
It was.
outside the wire of a base can always be dangerous. So was it you flew out there by helicopter or by truck? Did you go out?
We went out there by truck, and I had South Vietnamese Army, the Arvon, as my, escort. They were the ones defending me. So
did they allow you to carry a weapon? Or?
On that trip I could, yes, yeah. But it was like I say, a little hairy, just going there, then getting out in the water to get to the plane, and I was forewarned, watch out for the snakes, and that could be inside the plane as well as in the water you're
A
going
lot of
in.
snakes in Vietnam for the
Yeah.
listener. A lot of snakes.
Right. And the water and the fuselage was half submerged in water.
And so when you're out working on a plane, what did you remove from the airplane as an electronic specialist?
Well, obviously any radio equipment that was in there, navigation equipment. One of the things working on something the age of a C-47, a C-47 goes back to World War II. A lot of these planes were built in the 30s. And I always said, yeah, my father flew on one of these in World War II, which was true. And so to maintain them was a lot of tender, loving care to keep them flying. But parts were not easy to get. So you did a lot of cannibalization. So even things like basic instruments, I was pulling out of the instrument panel, which most people refer to as a dashboard, but if you aircraft lingo, it's an instrument panel. And I'd be pulling a lot of that stuff out, so bring it back for spares for our other aircraft, so that if need be, we could use those parts. So we picked it clean as much as we could, minus the engines was about the only thing we couldn't.
And then what happened? Is the aircraft shell left there? Did they?
It was just left there.
Just
yeah.
left there.
Yeah. The fact is, we disabled it to the point where, if the VC got to it, there wasn't a whole lot that it would never fly again.
Did any of the locals come in and say they're trying to rip off the aluminum? I mean, they would take everything, as you said. That was my experience. Anything that we had, they wanted.
True. I don't know what happened to that plane after I got finished with it, but I'm sure, anything they could use, they would.
Sure. A little side question. At my position, Anwar, one of the C-130s, when TAX came in, did a quick landing, was going to take off, drop its load. It was hit. One wing was blown off. They flew in some Air Force people because it was it was a Marine C-130. So I guess the Marines would have a similar unit, like a field op unit that would go out to try and rescue, and they actually
Right.
put the wing back on after a week or two to take off again. Then the enemy hit them again, blew off the other wing, and that was it.
Yeah.
It was so I guess they would then send a field unit to strip it. They just towed it off to the side with a tractor and just left it there. And I guess they stripped
Yes.
the thing, probably, right?
It's unusual that it was a Marine C-130 because mostly the Marines had helicopters over there. Especially, I have a good friend of mine who was on CH-53s, H-53s the whole time, which is a big Marine helicopter. The Marines and the Air Force actually used the 53s, which were referred to as Jolly Green Giants. But you didn't see too many Marines in C-130s. That's mostly an Air Force usage, and the Marines, of course, they had to do more with less all the time, and they would salvage anything they could. The Air Force was a little bit better off
when you're not looking.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Now, talk to us a little bit about Phan Rang, P-H-A-N, new word, R-A-N-G, Phan Rang.
Phan Rang.
Phan Rang.
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about that base compared to the Trang.
Well, it was a lot more active at Phan Rang. Nha Trang, it's the day before I left Nha Trang, and they were to turn the base over to the South Vietnamese. There was a lot of brass that came in for well, they actually did have a band and everything, for all the hoopla that they do for change of command ceremonies. And the day before that happened, we were almost overrun. I mean, mortars, rockets, everything came in. They fired everything they could on the base, trying to kill any high-ranking officials that were present at the time, So we really got the hell blown out of us for a while there at Nha Trang. And that was extremely unusual. Other than that, we would hear howitzers in our perimeter going off at night at Nha Trang, but not much else. When I got to Phan Rang, it was a little different there. They got hit quite a bit.
Now, now talk to us about that day at Nha Trang. What's it like to be there that day when big change of command ceremony, Americans, South Vietnamese, all kinds, say brass walking around, you get whacked. What's it like to be? And was that the first ground attack you had?
That was my first experience.
Rocket mortar attack.
And they actually put holes in the hospital building, in barracks. They chewed up the flight line pretty good. Destroyed a couple airplanes or damaged a lot of them. And it was an experience because, like I say, we didn't normally carry weapons. Yet it was an early morning attack, and I remember hearing the rockets and mortars, but then I remember also hearing small arms fire, which meant they were getting closer if they were using machine guns or AK-47s, and I heard it coming in and going out, and so I knew things were getting hot and heavy, and it was little bit.
So they broke through your wire.
They did.
Your bunker area.
They did.
And what happens next? Do you recall?
Well, they did call in for some air support. The funny thing about gunship squadrons, we had several of them in all over South Vietnam, but your own airplanes were not allowed to defend your base. It was Air Force regulations that you couldn't do that. You had to call in air support from another base, which we had to wait to do, and the air support was coming from Van Rang, and they were flying F-100s, but it took them forever to get there. But that's eventually what broke things up. But I do remember that being there for like 3 months, 2-3 months, whatever it was, I was sort of like one of the old hands. We had a lot of new guys come in, and I do remember hitting the deck below the sandbags, and a new guy that just came in, he couldn't have been more than 18 or 19 years old. At the time, I was an old guy. I was 20 years old, so I was almost 21. He just like saddled up next to me, and he was actually shaking, literally shaking. And there I was trying to soothe his nerves, so to speak, because I'm the old vet, been there for 3 months. But I had more experience than he did. And I was saying, don't worry, just stay low. Don't get up, stay low. And eventually...
Were there many casualties that time, do you recall?
I don't remember the actual amount, but there definitely were. And the sad part about it was, like you say, they had dropped a couple of mortars through our hospital building. Guys that were already there who were wounded wound up getting killed. So,
and so did you have nurses at the base also?
We did, yeah. So
it's very dangerous.
Yeah.
Any place in Vietnam, people understand if you're at an Air Force base, the enemy loves to drop in rockets and mortars on it. Da Nang got hit a lot too.
True.
To knock off some of the aircraft if they can.
Knock off the aircraft, disable the runways. There was a whole lot of things you could do to put us out of commission temporarily.
Now, up at Van Rang, you said you got hit on a more regular basis.
Yeah, that used to be almost a daily occasion. And it wasn't a lot. It would be a couple mortars, sometimes 2 or 3 rockets that would come in, and that'd be over. But just enough to put everybody on alert. You'd hear the sirens going off. Everybody had to take cover. They'd scramble people, to get out to the perimeters and whatever. But about the time we did that, Charlie was already gone. And
they would just drop a few rounds into.
Exactly.
Did they do it during the day or night?
It was funny. Sometimes it was during the day. Other times a lot of it was early morning. But we had a rocket come in at least once or twice a week, and we would say that was one rocket Charlie. That's all he had. He could fire that at us, and then he had to go all the way back to Hanoi to get a new one.
And they did, by the way, have these take buckets of water, put a wire onto the side of the bucket with water.
Yes.
A little cork with a wire
Yes.
on it. When that thing goes up and down due to rain and wind and all that, eventually it will make contact with the side of the bucket, create the charge, steal our C-cell, D-cell batteries.
Correct.
Hook them together in series, fire that rocket. You don't know when it's going to come in, and then we would fire, hundreds of rounds where that rocket came from.
And there was
But there's
nobody there.
That's
And
what
I was
they
explaining that philosophy or that theory to somebody about how they would do that, and that's probably why we got hit during the day. They could take a small bucket or container of water and put one lead floating on a cork in there, and as the day got warmer and the water evaporated, the cork would come down into the water and touch the other contact, and that's what, like you say, would fire the rocket. But they were nowhere around when that would happen.
Now, we have about 7 minutes left on this tape, so we're going to move along. Anything else that Don and I should have asked about Vietnam that we haven't asked about it yet?
Well, there's probably a whole lot. But things like the one USO show that I got to see
Bob Hope?
at Nha Trang. No, it was not Bob Hope. No, I'm sorry, it was at Phan Rang, not Nha Trang. But they had determined it was Bob Hope was there with Raquel Welch, but we never got to see her or Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders or anything. They decided it was too dangerous to fly him in there. Bob Hope being a national treasure, they're not going to endanger him at all.
And the enemy sort of knew what's going on.
Sure.
They had ways, spies all
Right.
over the place, sure.
And Bob Hope traveled with 3 C-130s. He had one for him and his supporting cast, whoever they were, one for just the equipment that he needed, sound equipment and everything, and the other for like stagehands and whatever they needed
They
to
were
put
all
together.
very brave to do this because it
They
was
were.
a dangerous area. And
Yeah.
I think when I was there, Bob Hope did a show up in Dunn, I believe.
Yes, he was there.
And they took one man out of every company from the 5th Marines, put him on a helicopter, no, 20 guys on a helicopter, sent him back to Dunn, and that was the
So they
5th
could see the show.
See the show, tell the guys about it, yeah.
That's
But he
nice.
was very brave and very kind, and all the people were very kind to do it. It was dangerous.
He was. I had another friend who was a loadmaster on a C-130 in Vietnam, and he had shown me all his things that he had got and an air medal and whatever. But one of the things he had was a gold-plated lighter, Zippo lighter, and a money clip with the caricature of Bob Hope on it. That's because he was loadmaster on board one of Bob Hope's tours, and he gave every member in the crew on all 3 planes that gold money clip and the lighter. And I said, Bruce, that would mean more to me than all those medals, because it's something really special.
For the historical record, Battleship New Jersey does, in its museum, have a special Bob Hope exhibit topside, one deck up, which you'll get to see today.
Okay, nice.
Real quickly, in a couple minutes, we should have spent more time on this. What about the electronics aboard these aircraft that you took care of? You said they're World War II type aircraft. It was World War II, much like the battleship. Parts of this battleship are still World War II piece of equipment.
Well, the Spookies, the AC-47s, were that. But when you moved into the AC-119s, they had gotten more sophisticated. And there was 2 versions of that. There was a G model and then a K model. The G model was a dumbed-down version, but it still had some sophisticated electronics on there. I believe that still had a FLIR system on it, which is forward-looking infrared, which one of the first times that they actually got used in Vietnam was on those gunships. The K models definitely had that, plus a few other gadgets. They also had, and that was highly classified, electronics at the time. It was a big deal. The K model and the G model, like you say, were separated by a couple things. The K model had so much stuff added onto it that it couldn't get off the ground with just the 2 reciprocating engines that the G model had. They actually added 2 smaller jets, so it was a 4-engine plane. They actually modified it, so just to get it airborne. Once it got up there, they would shut those jets off and it would fly on with the props. But it did have the FLIR system and had a lot of things on it. Both aircraft had what you were referring to earlier, a spotlight system, which we called an illuminator. And it would put out, I don't know, close to 1 million candle power. It took a lot of power to fire that up. It had its own auxiliary power unit, which was actually a jet engine, the same engine they used on a Huey. They used to run the generator to make this searchlight, if you will, operate. And it could operate in 2 different modes, the white light and an infrared. And they would use the white light, and I'm told when they would turn it on at an altitude of 3,000 feet, I've seen it happen, it would light up the area completely to where you could read a newspaper in the middle of the night. It'd be that bright. But when they flipped it to infrared, you couldn't see it, which was their main way of finding Charlie down there in the jungle. And then they would open up with those 20 millimeter cannons and miniguns, and that's when all hell broke loose. So that was their main purpose. They could also shoot flares out. The flares were low and slow, and
Parachute
they
flares.
parachute flares, right? Yeah, magnesium flares.
Which we liked a lot, by the way. Not only did they light up the area, but also the parachutes themselves make great little canopies to block the sun from you.
Oh, great.
We go steal, take them all in.
I'm glad somebody could use them, because we thought they would just burn up or left down.
We have 1 minute to go. Impact on your life. How did your experiences in the Air Force impact your life?
Greatly. It's 40 years later, I'm still talking about it. In fact, I have 2 boys who are both grown, but one said to me one time, Dad, I don't think there's anything that could come up, a story that you can't relate to the Air Force. And again, I wasn't just in Vietnam. I got back after a year and then I always say, I went from the hot war to the Cold War. I was assigned to a SAC base in Grissom, Indiana, and Strategic Air Command, and it was a whole different atmosphere. But we were always on alert. We're fighting the Cold War, waiting for the Russians to hit us, so it was a whole different thing. And I had a whole different experience there for those 2 years. So I have another hour to tell you about the Strategic Air Command if you had the time. But yeah, there's all those things greatly influenced me, and I wouldn't trade it for the world.